I never expected a simple plumbing issue would lead to one of the most unexpectedly flirtatious encounters of my life. Hi everyone, I'm Alex, a 28-year-old graphic designer working from home in my modest one-bedroom apartment in the city. Like many of you, I've been caught in that familiar cycle of work, Netflix, and the occasional night out with friends. My dating life had been particularly uneventful lately. A string of mediocre app dates had left me feeling somewhat disillusioned with the whole process. But sometimes, life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. It all started last Tuesday when I noticed a persistent drip from my kitchen sink. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that the rhythmic dripping sound had a certain meditative quality. But by Thursday morning, that peaceful drip had transformed into an annoying gurgle, and a small puddle had formed beneath the pipes. Now, I should mention that my DIY skills are practically non-existent. The last time I attempted to fix something around the house, I somehow managed to turn a wobbly chair leg into a completely disassembled chair. So, with a sigh of resignation, I knew it was time to call in professional help. My apartment is in an older building with character. Exposed brick walls, wooden floors with personality, that's code for slightly creaky, and fixtures that have seen better days. The sink itself was part of the original charm, which is a polite way of saying it was outdated and temperamental. I'd grown accustomed to its quirks, but this leak was beyond my threshold of tolerance. After a quick search online, I found a local plumbing service with decent reviews and scheduled an appointment for Friday afternoon. I wasn't particularly looking forward to having a stranger in my space. My apartment, while tidy enough, was distinctly lived in. Sketchbooks and colored pencils were scattered across my coffee table, half-finished design projects displayed on my desktop, and my collection of houseplants in various stages of thriving and struggling occupied every available windowsill. But necessity overruled my hesitation, and I prepared for the visit by clearing the area under the sink and making sure the path to the kitchen was navigable. Friday arrived, and I was working on a deadline for a client when the doorbell rang. I remember glancing at the clock, 2:15 p.m., right on time, and feeling mildly impressed by the punctuality. What I wasn't prepared for was the person standing on the other side of my door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with probably the most attractive plumber in the city's history. He introduced himself as Ethan, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I momentarily forgot how to form coherent sentences. Ethan stood about 6 feet tall with warm brown eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and he had the kind of 5 o'clock shadow that looked intentional rather than neglectful. He wore a standard uniform, a navy blue shirt with the plumbing company's logo and work pants, but somehow made it look like it had been tailored specifically for him. I'm not usually one to get flustered, but I definitely felt my cheeks warm as I invited him in and directed him toward the kitchen. "So, I hear you've got a sink that's causing you trouble," he said, his voice carrying a slight hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. There was something immediately disarming about his demeanor, professional, but with an underlying warmth that put me at ease. "Yeah, it started as a drip, but has evolved into something more ambitious," I replied, attempting humor to mask my unexpected nervousness. "I think it's trying to create its own water feature in my kitchen." He laughed, a genuine, rich sound that seemed to fill the small space of my kitchen. "Well, let's see if we can convince it to save its artistic aspirations for somewhere else." And with that, he set down his toolbox and knelt to examine the offending plumbing. As Ethan worked, I tried to focus on my laptop, but found my attention repeatedly drawn to the kitchen. He had rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms with a scattering of tattoos. Nothing flashy, just simple black line work that disappeared beneath his shirt cuff. His movements were confident and precise as he examined the pipes, occasionally muttering to himself in concentration. "Mind if I ask what you do?" he asked suddenly, glancing up from his work. I noticed all the art supplies when I came in. "I'm a graphic designer," I replied, surprised by his observation. "Mostly freelance work for small businesses and startups." "That's cool," he said with what seemed like genuine interest. "I always admired creative types. I can barely draw a straight line without a ruler." "Well, I can barely identify a wrench, so I guess we all have our strengths," I countered, which earned another laugh. There was something about the way he maintained eye contact just a beat longer than necessary that made me wonder if I was imagining the subtle current of flirtation between us. But surely I was reading too much into it. He was just being friendly, professional. After all, he was here to fix my sink, not to flirt with me. And yet, I couldn't help but notice how he seemed to find reasons to ask me questions, to keep the conversation flowing. As Ethan worked on the sink, he explained what he was doing in a way that was informative without being condescending. "This connection here has corroded a bit," he said, pointing to a section of pipe. "It happens in older buildings like this. The good news is it's an easy fix. I just need to replace this section and make sure everything's sealed properly." I leaned against the counter, watching him work. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked, genuinely curious about his background. "About 5 years now," he replied, reaching for a tool from his box. "I started right out of trade school. My dad was a plumber too, so I guess you could say it runs in the family." He glanced up with a smile. "Though I bet my dad never had clients quite as interesting as you." There it was again, that subtle hint that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just standard customer service politeness. I felt a flutter of something in my stomach, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Oh, and what makes me interesting?" I challenged, surprising myself with my boldness. Ethan paused his work, sitting back on his heels to look up at me. "Well, for starters, most people don't hang around to chat with their plumber. They usually disappear into another room until the job's done. And then there's your apartment. It tells a story. The art, the plants, the books on your shelf. It's like a little glimpse into who you are." I was taken aback by his observation. There was something disarming about being seen, really seen, by someone who was essentially a stranger. "I guess I never thought about it that way," I admitted. "But you're right. Spaces do tell stories about the people who live in them." "Exactly," he nodded, returning to his work. "And for what it's worth, I like the story your place is telling." The conversation flowed naturally as he continued working, shifting from talk about our respective jobs to favorite places in the city, music preferences, and even a brief, surprisingly deep discussion about whether cereal should be classified as soup. He argued yes, I vehemently disagreed. There was an ease to our interaction that felt unusual for having just met someone, especially in such a mundane context. At one point, Ethan asked me to hand him a specific tool from his box, and as I passed it to him, our fingers brushed. It was a brief, innocent touch, but there was no denying the small jolt of electricity I felt. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled, a different smile than before, slightly more hesitant, more personal. "Thanks," he said softly, holding my gaze for a moment before returning to the pipes. The repair was taking longer than I expected, but I found myself hoping it would take even longer. There was something refreshing about this unexpected connection, this easy rapport with someone I wouldn't normally cross paths with. As Ethan worked, I noticed more details about him. The way he bit his lower lip slightly when concentrating, a small scar near his right eyebrow, the clean scent of his cologne that somehow cut through the industrial smell of plumbing materials. After about an hour of work, interspersed with conversation, Ethan finally announced that he had fixed the issue. "The good news is, your sink should behave itself now," he said, standing up and washing his hands at the newly repaired faucet. "The bad news is, I don't have an excuse to stick around any longer." There was a playful quality to his voice, but also an unmistakable hint of something more, a question, perhaps, or an invitation. I felt my heart rate quicken slightly. "Well, that is disappointing," I replied, matching his tone. And here I was just getting used to having a plumber as a conversation partner. He dried his hands on the towel I'd provided, his eyes never leaving mine. "You know," he said, his voice taking on a slightly more serious tone, "this might sound completely unprofessional, but I've really enjoyed talking with you. More than I probably should admit while on the clock." I felt a smile spreading across my face, unable to contain it. "I've enjoyed it too," I admitted. Who knew plumbing repairs could be so entertaining? Ethan laughed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed to indicate a touch of nervousness beneath his confident exterior. "So, I was thinking," he continued, closing his toolbox and straightening up. "My next appointment canceled, which means I unexpectedly have the rest of the afternoon free. And I was wondering if maybe you'd like to be a good distraction." The question hung in the air between us. its meaning clear yet ambiguous enough to give either of us an out if needed. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he asking me out? Right here, right now? Was this crossing some kind of customer service provider boundary? Did I even care if it was? A distraction? I repeated, buying myself time to process my thoughts. Yeah, he nodded, a hint of vulnerability showing through his confident demeanor. Maybe grab a coffee at that place on the corner? I noticed it when I parked. Unless, of course, you need to get back to work, which I completely understand. I'd like that. I interrupted, surprising myself with my decisiveness. To be a distraction, I mean. Coffee sounds great. The relief and pleasure that spread across his face was unmistakable, and I felt an answering warmth in my chest. There was something thrilling about this unexpected turn of events. The ordinary day transformed by a chance encounter. A broken sink leading to what felt like the beginning of something interesting. Great, Ethan said, his smile widening. Just let me finish up the paperwork for the repair, and we can head out. As he filled out the service form, I found myself wondering about the odds of this situation. How many times in life do we pass by potential connections without realizing it? How many repair people, baristas, or strangers on buses might have been meaningful to our lives if we'd just engaged a little more, been a little more present? While Ethan completed the paperwork, I quickly freshened up in the bathroom, checking my reflection and wondering what exactly I was doing. Was I really about to go on an impromptu coffee date with my plumber? The absurdity of it made me smile. There was something refreshingly straightforward about this interaction. No apps, no carefully curated profiles, just two people who enjoyed talking to each other and wanted to continue. When I returned to the kitchen, Ethan was waiting, his toolbox packed, and his demeanor slightly shifted from professional to personal. All set, he said, handing me my copy of the service receipt. Your sink is officially fixed, and my professional obligations are complete. Just in time for coffee, I replied, grabbing my keys and wallet. As we walked to the door, I felt a flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. This was definitely not how I expected my Friday afternoon to unfold when I woke up this morning. There was something almost old-fashioned about the spontaneity of it all. No planning, no digital prelude, just an organic connection formed in real time. The coffee shop was just a short walk from my apartment, a cozy independent place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. The transition from my apartment to this public space created a subtle shift in our dynamic. Without the pretext of the repair job, we were now just two people getting to know each other, navigating the early stages of whatever this was becoming. So, Ethan said as we settled at a small table by the window, coffees in hand. Is this the strangest way you've ever ended up on a coffee date? Definitely top 3, I laughed. Though I once ended up having lunch with someone after we both tried to rescue the same lost dog in the park. And did that turn into anything? He asked, a hint of competitive curiosity in his voice. Just a friendship, I replied. And joint custody of the dog, which we never actually found the owner for. She takes him weekends, I have him weekdays. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, seriously? No, I laughed. But the look on your face was worth it. Our conversation flowed as easily in the coffee shop as it had in my apartment, perhaps even more so now that the professional context had been shed. I learned that Ethan had grown up in the suburbs just outside the city, had a younger sister studying medicine, and played guitar in a band that performed at local venues occasionally. He was funny in a subtle way, intelligent without being showy about it, and had an attentiveness that made me feel like every word I said was being genuinely heard. Can I ask you something? I said after a lull in conversation. Do you make a habit of asking your clients out for coffee, or should I feel special? Ethan looked slightly embarrassed, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Definitely not a habit, he admitted. In fact, it's completely against company policy. But there was something about you. I don't know. I just knew I'd regret it if I didn't at least try to see you again outside of a professional context. His honesty was disarming, and I found myself appreciating the straightforwardness. Well, I'm glad you broke the rules then, I said. Though I hope it doesn't get you in trouble. Worth the risk, he replied with a smile that made my stomach do a small flip. As our coffee date extended into a second hour, I found myself increasingly drawn to Ethan's combination of confidence and vulnerability. He talked about his passion for his work, not just the technical aspects, but the satisfaction of solving problems and helping people. There was no pretense, No attempt to make his job sound more glamorous than it was. Instead, there was a genuine pride in craftsmanship that I found incredibly attractive. "What about you?" he asked. "Did you always want to be a graphic designer, or did you have other dreams?" "I actually wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid," I confessed. "I was obsessed with whales and dolphins. But then I realized I get seasick on anything smaller than a cruise ship, so that dream died pretty quickly." Ethan laughed. "From marine biology to graphic design is quite a pivot. I've always been creative," I explained. "Drawing, painting, making things. Design just felt like a way to make a living doing something I loved. Though sometimes when I'm dealing with particularly difficult clients, I do wonder if whales would have been easier to work with." Our conversation meandered through childhood memories, embarrassing stories, favorite movies, and travel dreams. With each exchange, the initial attraction I'd felt deepened into something more substantial, a genuine interest in who he was as a person, beyond the physical appeal that had first caught my attention. Eventually, we noticed the coffee shop was beginning to fill with the after-work crowd, and we'd been sitting at our table for over 2 hours. "I should probably let you get back to your day," Ethan said, though his reluctance was evident in his voice. "I've monopolized your afternoon." I was a willing participant in the monopolization, I assured him. "But yeah, I do have a project I should finish before the weekend." We stood somewhat awkwardly, the easy flow of conversation suddenly interrupted by the uncertainty of what came next. Would this be it, a pleasant, unexpected afternoon that would become an anecdote to share with friends? Or was there potential for something more? Ethan seemed to be wrestling with the same question. "So," he began, his confidence from earlier tempered with a touch of nervousness, "I'd really like to see you again. Properly, I mean. Not because of a plumbing emergency, or because I happen to be in your neighborhood." The directness of his statement made me smile. "I'd like that too," I replied, feeling a warm rush of anticipation. "Great," he said, the relief evident in his voice. "Maybe dinner next week? I know a great Thai place that does amazing curry." "That sounds perfect," I agreed, pulling out my phone. "We should probably exchange numbers this time, instead of relying on plumbing disasters to bring us together." As we exchanged contact information, our fingers brushed again, this time deliberately, I thought. There was a charged moment as we stood outside the coffee shop, both seemingly reluctant to part ways. "This was nice," Ethan said softly. "Unexpected, but really nice." "The best things usually are unexpected," I replied, surprising myself with the sentiment. He smiled, and for a moment I thought he might lean in for a kiss. Instead, he gently squeezed my hand. "I'll text you about dinner," he promised. "And hey, if anything else breaks in your apartment before then, maybe don't call the company number. Call me directly." I laughed. "I'll keep that in mind, though I'm hoping my appliances behave themselves for a while." We parted ways with a lingering look and the promise of more to come. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't help but smile at the absurdity and perfection of the afternoon. Who would have thought that a leaky sink could lead to one of the most promising connections I'd felt in ages? Back in my apartment, I looked at the now-repaired sink with a new appreciation. Sometimes the most ordinary problems lead to the most extraordinary possibilities. I had no idea where things with Ethan might go. Maybe dinner would lead to more dates, maybe to something significant, or maybe just to a friendship. But there was something undeniably exciting about the potential, about the unexpected path that had opened up before me. That evening, as I was finishing my work project, my phone buzzed with a text. "Just checking that your sink is behaving itself," Ethan had written. "Also, I haven't stopped thinking about our conversation. Looking forward to continuing it over dinner." I smiled as I typed my reply, feeling a flutter of anticipation for what might come next. Life has a funny way of surprising you sometimes. You think you're just fixing a problem, only to discover an unexpected beginning. And as I glanced once more at my perfectly functioning sink, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the things that seem broken lead us exactly where we need to go. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself recounting the day's events with a sense of wonder. It wasn't just the attraction to Ethan, though that was certainly there, but the reminder that connections can form in the most mundane circumstances if we're open to them. How many opportunities for connection do we miss because we're distracted, because we treat service interactions as transactions rather than human exchanges? I fell asleep that night with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in a long time. Whatever happened next with Ethan, whether it developed into something meaningful or remained a pleasant memory, I was grateful for the reminder that life still had the capacity to surprise me. Sometimes all it takes is a broken sink and the courage to say yes to an unexpected invitation to be a good distraction. Total _char_count, 18,747.